Hey there, everybody. Mean Duke Alex here from St. Louis. I want to set this one up a little bit because we've had some chatter in the guild about things like conflicts of interest and my job at Gray Fox. And obviously, this interview you're about to hear is with Josh Lobcowicz from Gray Fox Games. The format of the interview is pretty much what I would do in typical Holden Court, but again, it's someone I work with. So full disclosure out there, if you're someone who is genuinely upset by that kind of a thing, I totally get it. No worries, no problems, but just be aware that that's going on. One other thing, though, with this one is my computer crashed mid-interview, and something that's never happened when I've done these over Skype, but in person, for whatever reason, it didn't want to behave. So my audio's a little bit far away with this one. We did our best to fix it, but it should still be listenable too. Just be aware that's going on. All right, enjoy my conversation with Josh Lobcowicz from Gray Fox Games. Thank you so much for joining us for this Patreon-backed interview episode of the Dukes of Dice. And I'm doing this one in person here with Josh Lobcowicz. Josh, the head developer at Gray Fox Games, unless you gave yourself a different title.
No, head of game development is how it is now. I mean, we started with chief of stuff, but we didn't think that was specific enough, though it did encompass all of my duties.
So Josh, for folks who don't know, where are you from? What's your background? When did you get started in gaming?
Well, the from question is hard for me. I'm kind of a citizen of nowhere, someone who's traveled a bunch, right? I identify with kind of the Northeast in the U.S. So, like, I grew up in New Hampshire. I went to college in Maine. And my educational background is in English, literature, and language. When I was studying that, I kind of thought that I would write novels after college. I did journalism for some time, and it quickly became apparent to me that I was actually a better editor than a writer, and those skills actually helped me transition into game development, because when I explain what I do to people who aren't in this industry, I tell them I work for a publisher, and I essentially am an editor. I'm just an editor for board games instead of books.
What was the dream novel, or the novel you sunk the most time in? What was the plot or the idea of it?
I mean, it's it's a funny question. It's one of these sort of interesting things that when you study writing in college, specifically creative writing, they only teach one thing, right? They only teach literary fiction. And what I've always been interested in is science fiction and fantasy. And what I learned to write was literary fiction. And I often found it boring. So when I started to work on writing for myself, it was literary fiction with a hint of something else. So the novel that I made it farthest in was kind of like a magical realist type of story. But I don't know that 80 pages really qualifies as like a real strong push, you know?
That's 80 more pages than I've ever done on a novel, so you were well on your way there.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately I wrote some pieces that I was proud of, shorter pieces, but novel writing is not something I have a knack for, and honestly, I think it is better that I realized that and worked towards putting my skills into something else that I have a passion for, as opposed to really trying to grind out something that didn't come very naturally to me.
Yeah, no kidding. So on the other side of things, where do board games come into the picture? How do you get involved in that side of things? Because, like me, you started more on the community side of things.
Yeah, I mean, board gaming has been a part of my life forever. Really, like as far back as I can remember, I've been board gaming. When I was younger, it was tough because my parents would not like to play board games with me. So I remember very distinctly being 10 and getting Hero Quest and kind of forcing my parents to play with me. And I think we got one game in and they were like, well, that was a game. And so I had to recruit friends to play board games with me. But I mean, like, I don't know, it was an era where that didn't really seem easy, right? Most of my childhood, my friends wanted to play outside, and so I wanted to play outside and then just had board games as opposed to playing board games. Around college is when I got really active in playing board games because it was easier to find opponents, and I started a gaming club at Southern Maine Community College, which is where I went to get my associates before going on to a state college to get my bachelor's degree. We started a gaming club there, and I don't know, from that point forward it was game nights multiple days a week. And so that's when I started building the collection and playing games. And so I don't know. I think I bought my first like real hobby game in maybe 2003.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I think the first game I picked up was Leo Colavini's Clans, and then shortly after that, Settlers and Carcassonne, because I was looking for board games online and came across Board Game Geek, which is a familiar story for lots of people, I'm sure.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, from that point until the present, gaming has been a hobby for me, something that I've enjoyed doing, recruited, proselytized for, and so I've been pretty active in the Board Game Geek community, specifically the Werewolf community. I made a lot of friends there. The first sort of big board gaming convention I went to was Board Game Geek Con, where I got to meet a lot of those people in person, and I don't know, it became clear that there was a community I liked being part of and a hobby that I enjoyed participating in. So from that point forward, board games have been part of my life. As far as the transition professionally, after college, I went to China for a year and spent some time teaching English and working on my writing over there. And that's kind of when I came to the realization that writing was not what I was going to do. So when I came back to the States and was looking to do something else, I got involved with Cool Stuff Inc. Ended up working as a store manager for them, and Gray Fox was kind of born of that company. Shane, the president of Gray Fox, was an owner in Cool Stuff before he branched off to do this full time. Yeah. And so as he started this, I got to kind of work with him, kind of come in on the ground floor as he was figuring out how to produce and manufacture board games. He saw that I had a passion for this, and I basically volunteered to work on some projects. And when it became clear to, I mean, both of us really, that this was something that I had a knack for, you know, meeting designers, finding games that had good concepts but needed polish, and that I could kind of look at them at a big picture and pare out the things that didn't need to be there and make suggestions about what did need to be there. It became pretty clear that this was something I had a knack for, and then we just sort of took it from there.
I want to go back and fill in a few more of the details of the gaming past, because I think folks are always curious what the one game that hooks you in is.
Okay.
I mean, for me, it was Settlers of Catan. Had me think about rolling dice in a completely different, fundamentally different way that I never thought about rolling dice in the context of a game before. It was no longer just a roll and write, or roll and move. I wasn't playing roll and writes growing up. That would have been pretty cool if I was.
Yeah.
Was there one game that had the switch really flip? Because I've been into games for a long while as well, but it wasn't until I saw a Pandemic or played a Settlers of Catan that I really flipped and got hooked.
I mean, there was certainly a moment where I had the realization that games had evolved, but there was never really a game that sort of made me evolve in the way that I think about gaming. I think that, like, I've always had sort of something strange on my shelf, right? Like, I had the Reiner Nietzsche Lord of the Rings game when I was 16, right? 16 or 17, right when that game came out. And at that point, it wasn't this sort of realization like, this is a hobby game, this is something different. It was just a game, and a game that I enjoyed. It wasn't until I discovered Board Game Geek that kind of there was this realization for me, like, holy smokes, there's a whole world of games out there that are different than what I realize. I had Risk 2210 AD before I was like really into hobby gaming, and the evolution of that from the original Risk was something that was attractive to me. But I don't know. I don't think there was a game that made me realize that gaming had evolved. Board Game Geek as a website made me realize that gaming had evolved, and I had sort of crept into it without realizing.
Yeah, kind of more. Yeah, it's interesting. You kind of came into it from a different way. What was it about Werewolf that was something that hooked you and got you into that? Was it just the community, or was there something about that game? What is it about Werewolf that really got you going in the early days?
It's both. It's the community and the game. Werewolf it's so much a social experiment, which attracts me anyway. I mean, I mentioned earlier that my major in college was English literature and language. My minor was sociology. And so that's something that, you know, to this day, I still read sociological articles and find interest in that. And discovering Werewolf as a game on the forums and playing them on Board Game Geek via the forum before I ever played it in person was fascinating. The way that you see people take on a role and watch their behavior change around these pretty subtle mechanics is a really sort of fascinating observation. But there's also this spirit of camaraderie. Like, it's a game where you must lie and deceive, and often in pretty horrible ways to people that you may know or love or trust, right? Like I have lied directly to my wife's face many times in games of werewolves. Like, yes, I lied to my wife and then killed her. And then at the end of the game, you're like, hey, we can talk about the strategy of this. So, like, it was this fascinating exercise in how people can take on personas in a game, how their social interactions change, and how you kind of merge this gaming persona and real life persona. And so that has always been of interest to me. The community on Board Game Geek, specifically the werewolf community, is one of the most welcoming communities I've ever been a part of. And I think that the kindness of the people in those forums, in no small part, make me love that game. The game itself is a lot of fun for me, but it's not a game that I look at and think it's brilliantly designed or something. It's a game that is made by the people who play it, and that's a real attraction to me in this hobby. There are a billion games out there, and some of them are really well designed, and some of them are not so well designed, and the vast majority of them can be fun for me if I'm playing them with the right people.
For folks who don't know, Josh is not one of these guys who cares whether he wins or loses in a game necessarily. But I will ask this for the purposes of the record here. With Werewolf, are you any good at Werewolf? Did you win more often than you lost?
I mean, I don't know if I won more often than I lost. I feel like I'm pretty good at Werewolf, and I feel and I know that I can check my stats on Board Game Geek, but as somebody who's not terribly competitive, it's not something that I paid attention to. Werewolf, like other games, is memorable for me mostly based on the moments that occur, not on the outcome. And so that's another facet of gaming that I love. Like, I have games where I remember very distinctly epic moments in the game and have no recollection of who won, and that's Werewolf and other things. All that being said, yeah, I think I'm okay at Werewolf. I also play poker and enjoy that. I think you get to employ some of the same skills. I think that being a convincing liar in that context is something that I don't know. It's fun in the moment, and it's a skill that I think I have and enjoy using in the context of gaming. I mean, I think you and I have talked about how I'm the Boss is one of my favorite games too, and this is a game based on pure negotiation. And I don't know. It's a game that if I were to participate in that sort of negotiation activity in real life, I'd be very, very uncomfortable. But in the context of a game, I can get into the spirit of it and love it. I don't know. I feel like I've strayed from the question, but
no, that's fine.
There you have it.
No, but I think drifted somewhere pretty interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's outside of that magic circle. Things that are things you wouldn't do inside the magic circle absolutely become much easier.
Yeah,
and I it's interesting when you see how that comes into play with different mechanics in games or different things. I mean, games do give you permission to do things that you wouldn't normally do, which is a lot of fun. So what were some of the first projects you took on when you joined up with Shane and Shane had some work and you jumped on board? What were some of those first projects?
I mean, the first two games that Grey Fox put out were a game called Conquest of Speros, which is a card-driven area control game, and Captain's Wager, it's kind of like a trick-taking meets limit poker kind of game. And so those were two Kickstarters that we did early on. I came in kind of on the tail end of Conquest of Speros and just kind of did some editing, cards and rules for clarity. Captain's Wager I got in a much earlier state and helped try and bring to completion. But the first project that I really threw myself into was the Champions of Midgard base game. And that was one that Shane had picked up at a BGG con from a meeting with Ola Steinis. And when we got it, it was this really sort of fascinating core, right? It was like, there are these dice, and they're your primary resource, and you send them off to defeat monsters, and that thing's really cool. And then, there's also kind of an economy around it, and we'll work that out.
So when you get that game in that state, how is it different from the product that folks see on the shelves today? What was it? Obviously, you mentioned there was a core there that was the same, a core that carried over into the final product. Mm-hmm. But the big part of your task was taking what you got and molding it into what folks see when they go to their friendly local game store and see that thing on the table. What was that game initially? And I'm really curious, because I know the answer to this. What was the name initially?
Well, the name originally when we got it, I think it was just called Dice Vikings.
Okay.
And the process of getting it from that state to the finished product is hugely collaborative. Ola and I kind of went back and forth over a period of a year and a half with sort of tweaks and reports about, how the game felt, how the game was testing, where, what parts needed to be removed, where we could kind of beef up and add a little bit more excitement. An early version of this game had a board with no score tracker. And all of your points were on cards that you collected, and they were all hidden. And they were also pretty minor. So, like, I remember an early version of this game, we got to the end of the game, and we were like, what's your score? 12. What's yours? 13. And it wasn't satisfying, right? Like, you might have a stack of a handful of monsters, and then you looked at that number, and the feeling of that didn't match the feel of the game, right? Like, I felt like I went on this epic journey, and I killed a bunch of stuff, and I need more credit. 13 points of credit wasn't enough. So we toyed a lot with the point economy, and we toyed a lot with kind of the resources available in the game. One of the early versions of the game had what later came in an expansion. It had Journeys Over Land. And when we put that in expansion, it was because we had notes from this concept that didn't work in the past. But I remember at one point managing extra resources in that game and having little horse tokens that would carry me over land on journeys, and then watching people play that game and realizing people were spending a lot more time pushing little horse tokens back and forth between the supply than they were going off on journeys and killing stuff. So I don't know. A lot changed. Early versions of the game, I think we've posted pictures of some of these things somewhere, but the merchant ships didn't used to be a deck of cards. It used to be kind of this cool, quirky concept that there was a wheel built into the bottom of the board, and you would spin it and the next ship would come in. But ultimately, we liked the excitement of not knowing what was coming into the harbor next time, as opposed to having this sort of fixed result. So, over a period of a year and a half, Ola would send a version of the game. I would play it and make some notes, and send him, a list of sort of ideas that I thought we needed to explore, things that needed to be removed or added. And then we would also take it out and test it and see what the feedback was like. A lot of our process, as far as developing a game goes, involves playtesters, but whenever I'm doing an evaluation of a prototype, I like to write up sort of a complete report on where I think the game is before I show it to anybody else, because we don't want to design by committee, right? When we sign a game that we like, we trust that the designer has the chops to get the game to where we think it needs to be, and we don't want to just give it out to the community and be like, well, we had a dozen playtests and this was a comment on multiple of them, and that will be in the game now. But I like to see where I think a game is, what I think the fun parts are, where I think the fun is not, and then hand it off to a group of strangers and see where we have really divergent ideas and where we have ideas that overlap and where those things kind of mix with the designer's vision. Ola is somebody who is great to work with because he is really quick at coming up with new ideas and thematic ideas. So, particularly with the expansions to Champions of Midgard, he would send me a thing, I would take some notes and send it to him, and before I had gotten it to other people to test it and send a response to him, he would have sent me a new kit. And be like, well, what about all this? So, he's got a lot of chops, and he's exciting to work with. And we actually have another game of his we're working on now, which is kind of Champions of Midgard adjacent.
Hey. Cool it, buddy.
Okay. I'll tell you about it later.
Yeah. No, going back a little bit, because you mentioned playtesting, and I think folks who, at least when I was on the other side of this, when I wasn't on the industry side of this, my sense of what playtesting was and what playtesting wasn't has changed now that I'm on this side of the business. Mm-hmm. what can playtesting do and what can playtesting not do? In other words, what are you looking for it to fix or improve or test in a game, and what are you absolutely not looking for playtesting feedback on, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I mean, it's a great question, and one I think that probably publishers are constantly refining. I know it's something that we're constantly refining. I mean, the most important question that I can ask my playtesters is, what part of this game was the most fun for you, and what part of the game was the least fun for you? Those identifiers are the strongest feedback we can get. When somebody can very specifically tell me this part was not fun and here's why, and this part was fun and here's why, that's a thing that we can run with in terms of development. We obviously get feedback sometimes that is like about the quality of the prototype, which is not terribly useful, and we've tried to make better prototypes to avoid that type of feedback.
Not always so easy.
Right. But, games can often go through lots of iterations, and there's a trade-off between speed and quality and like the physical components. Playtesters often want to give suggestions on where they think a game should go. And truly, that is often not terribly helpful either, because this comes down to what individual players feel like is fun and is often not representative of the game that's in front of them. And so you can have players who, like I have had players who really like engine building, and the feedback from every game is, wouldn't it be neat if there was an element of engine building in here? And the answer is often, maybe, but it's part of my job to look at that feedback and go, is that something that actually fits in this game? And if it is, then it's something we want to explore with the designer, but it's often not. And it's difficult often to parse when playtesters are giving you feedback about the game they played versus when aspiring designers are playtesting and trying to put something they'd like to see in a game in the prototype they just played.
I think that's hard to avoid, because I think just about anyone who's a serious gamer in this hobby has some aspirations of some design they cooked up at some point that they thought could be a really... But there's a difference between an aspiring designer and a designer in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, and there's also a huge distinction between design and development, as far as I'm concerned, and it's one of the reasons that when I tell people what I do, I use the editor reference,
right? Because
I'm not a game designer. I have never put together something from scratch. I don't think I'm that's terribly tailored to my skills either. It's much easier for me to take something that exists already and identify its strengths and weaknesses and give direction than it is for me to essentially construct something from nothing, right? What Ola Steinus does, in my mind, is magic, right? Where he takes scraps of paper and turns them into a game. And what I do is take that game and polish off the rough edges and help the heart of it shine.
Well, and Daniel Newman asked a question to that effect on our Board Game Geek Guild. He was curious, have you designed any games from the ground up? I mean, do you know this from experience that this isn't your forte? I know you mentioned that you learned pretty early on the novelist side of things, that you tend to be a better editor than a writer yourself. But had you ever actually attempted to design a game?
I mean, I put together something of a party game once upon a time and pitched it to Grey Fox, or early in the company's whatever it is. I don't know the word.
History.
Sure.
life cycle. I don't know.
My degree has failed me as I'm struggling to find the words. Yeah, and I don't know. It ultimately, when I took some steps back and played it, I didn't think it was very good. So yeah, I mean, I've attempted it, but the thing about designing for me is really close to my history in writing, which is that the thing that perhaps I am best at is not the thing that satisfies me. The games that I enjoy playing is nothing I've ever tried to design because they overwhelm me. Like Stefan Feld is one of my favorite designers, and I wouldn't even know where to start to make one of his games. It doesn't stop me from playing his games and looking at them with a critical eye and thinking, maybe this particular part could be done better.
Everyone's a critic.
Yeah, I mean, that's true in any in any sort of creative field, right? That when you start to look at something with a critical eye, as you must to do it professionally, you can't turn it off. So I still have a lot of fun playing games, but whenever I play a game, I'm looking at it as a developer.
Jake Bach from the Draft Mechanic podcast was curious more about when you're looking to pick up a game, when designers are pitching you games, what is the first thing you look at? Or I'm actually asking a different question than the one he asked, so I'll ask a different question. What do you look for when you're looking to pick up a game? Does it have to have some core thing that's fun? Does it have to have a cool, interesting theme? I know for a fact it's not the name, because we've talked about this. There's...
let's go back to that for a second.
Yeah.
We can do the naming thing, too. Champions of Midgard started, we mentioned, as Dice Vikings.
Yeah.
And we brought it back to Ole and said, this game is a lot more epic than the title is giving it credit for. We'd like you to pitch us a title that you think captures the feel of, what you're doing. Make the game seem more epic. And he was like, Fury of the Dice Vikings. And we were like, yeah, that's better. But we want to capture the sort of the whole scope, not just the combat. And it was Journey of the Dice Vikings. And then we were like, okay, we got to go a different direction. So the name doesn't matter, right? Yeah. By the time a game has finished going through development and finished going through testing, everybody who has come in contact with it has some feeling about what the game captures. And by that point, we have enough of sort of a group in the office, in our playtesters, of people who have told us what the experience of the game is like, that at that point, the name often comes naturally. The final name for a game is often the last thing that we decide upon. Champions of Midgard, as people will probably see at the BGG page, enjoyed a brief stint as Defenders of Nidaros. And Nidaros is a Viking era word for the city of Trondheim. And we realized before we released the game that Defenders was misleading. Like, you're not defending, you are attacking, you are going out on journeys, right? The game is much less passive than that name implies. So we ended up settling on something that was more active, right? You're not defenders, you're champions. And that felt right to us. In any case, back to what we're looking for when we pick up a game.
Yeah.
The name doesn't matter, and the answer is twofold. The simple answer is the game has to be fun. And that's it. I don't look for games with a specific theme. I don't look for games with specific mechanics. I don't even necessarily look for games of a particular genre or style or length. I just want it to be fun. And then the secondary answer is, well, that depends on what our release cycle looks like, right? Like 2 years ago, any game that was fun would have been great. And now that we have 2 years out worth of games signed, when I look at a game, I have to consider, where does it fit in the release cycle? Even if this is fun, does it duplicate something that we have in the line? Will it come out too close to something else? So when people are pitching games, they often ask me what Gray Fox is looking for, and I tell them under 2 hours and fun. And you can break the time rule if the game's more fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything's flexible except for fun.
Right. Yeah.
Is something unique a prerequisite? Obviously, it has to be unique for the line, but does it have to be unique overall in the broad spectrum of the hobby?
No. It certainly doesn't. I mean, when we see unique mechanics, that's great. We get excited when somebody shows me something that hasn't been done before. But the games that I think people get most excited about, or the games that are most successful, are not the games that do something that nobody's ever done before. They do things that have been done before differently or better, right? It's much easier to get somebody playing a game when you can tell them, this game is like this, but... And so those touchstones are often pretty important. We learned that with Deception, Murder in Hong Kong. We were pitching it at a convention, or we were demoing it at a convention. and an older woman came by and she asked what the game was about, and I started to explain it to her, and she said, "Oh, so it's like Clue." And I went, "No, it's..." And I paused for a second. I went, "Yeah, it is. Yeah. There is a solution. There is a murder, and there is a solution, and you're trying to uncover it." And it occurred to me that that touchstone, or whatever touchstone people have for that game, it is like Mysterium, it is like The Resistance, but is what makes that game attractive to people. And I think that we more often see the games that people get excited about are games that have a touchstone for them and bring something fresh to the genre than something that completely reinvents the wheel. It's much harder to get people behind something for which they have no touchstone.
Yeah. Something to relate the game to. Even if it does something unique, it has to be tethered to something.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, I think Dominion is a wonderful example that it brought deck building to the gaming hobby, but it's not like the concept of building a deck was foreign. People were doing it in CCGs for ages. They just tweaked it in just the right fashion that it seemed fresh and new, and it was something that had never been done in that way before, and it, for a time, set the world on fire.
And now it itself is a touchstone.
Right.
Which happens at a certain point. What's the most common mistake you see designers make when they're pitching you a game? The one thing that constantly gets screwed up or turns you off from a game, or the one thing that can make a pitch go sideways?
I mean, I think the thing that I see designers do most often is try to teach me their whole game in the pitch. And it's a hard way to process a game, but it also, I think it shows a lack of refinement in where the design state is. Right? When we do, I mean, I see a lot of 5-minute pitches, which are not the best way to see a game. They're not wonderful for a publisher because we don't really get a whole scope of what the game is like, and they're really stressful for designers who are trying to take a game that plays in 30 minutes or 60 minutes or 90 minutes or 120 minutes and tell you everything you need to know about it in 5. When somebody is pitching me a game and the pitch starts with, "In this game you do this," I already know I'm not going to get a sense of how this game is. And it also tells me that they're not really sure what the game feels like yet. They know what the mechanics are, but they haven't yet identified the parts that are fun. So the best way, I think, to pitch a game is to tell people, here is the setting of the game, right? You are this. Champions of Midgard is a good example. You are a Viking leader hunting monsters for glory. And then hit the highlights. It's a worker placement game where you go on journeys, there's a push your luck mechanic, and then there's some dice-driven combat instead of cashing in resources for points. That's a super duper pared down version, and you have no idea how to play this game, but I've probably hit a couple of the things that make you go, yeah, that's something I could be interested in, or, oh, I don't think that's for me.
Yeah, pretty quickly. What's the single best pitch you've ever been a part of, whether the game was signed or not by Gray Fox?
You know what? I don't know what the single best pitch I've got is. Maybe
give me a couple.
That's not true, actually.
Okay.
I can probably the London Dread pitch was the best pitch that we've ever received. But I mean, it was the best pitch in terms of getting our attention. It wasn't the best pitch in terms of telling me what the game was about. The guys who pitched that game really knew how to set up their atmosphere. And so they brought us not only their pitch for the game, but like a little package, like an envelope with a wax seal on it that really captured the aesthetic of the game. So we were sold on the world of the game before we were sold on the mechanics. So they had a heck of a hook. So that may have been the best pitch that I received on a game, but it's not a thing that I request. I don't want every designer giving me a custom wax sealed package now to bring me into their world.
Hey, apparently it has a 100% success rate. Yeah. So just saying.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Let's just not give out my address. I don't want to get overwhelmed with the little brown bags.
Fair
enough. And I can imagine there are some folks who are so far over the top in terms of theme that it's lovely, but if you don't know what the game's like at all, then what's the point? You can tell a story about a theme all day, every day, but there has to be something else that it connects to.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think the best advice I can give to people who want to pitch games is to work on their sell sheets, because while I've never picked up a sell sheet and been sold specifically on a game because of the sell sheet, I know that it forces designers to think about the highlights of their game. And if it's difficult for you to explain the best parts of your game on that 8x11 page, I don't think you've discovered them yet.
When you've signed a game, I'm going to now ask the question Jake was trying to ask, and actually did ask, and then I failed to ask.
Poor Jake. He's been waiting a long time.
Sorry, Jake. What's the most common first thing you look at to develop a game? When this has been signed, it's in your pipeline, you're getting to work on this. What's the first thing you attack?
The first thing I attack is the fun factor. I mean, the first round of playtesting we do is very broad scope. Is it fun? And if so, well, I mean, regardless, is it fun? Why or why not? Because we know that in order for a game to have legs, it needs to have moments that people remember. And so, we're constantly saying higher highs and lower lows. Games that they're just okay throughout, no matter how elegant the mechanics are not things that I think at least our audience is looking for. So I want to identify what people think is the best part, what people think is the worst part, and then figure out how we can ratchet up the best part and make those any parts that are feel bad moments go away. And honestly, it's really the first step for me in a game is identifying what needs to go. I think that a lot of the games that we've signed have come in with parts that we really loved and parts that we went, well, maybe this is okay. And more often than not, we've taken the parts that we didn't love and excised them as opposed to repairing them. And it's often something that designers find difficult to do, right? Kill your darlings. They need somebody else to go, this part doesn't need to be here. Obviously, we also look at game balance as well. And so early on in the process of a game, I will try and deconstruct it mathematically on my own. I put together spreadsheets with sort of the implied value of actions or resources, and then send it to the designer and say, do you feel like this is true? And sometimes they have something similar and go, yeah, I've worked it out to about the same as you. And some designers don't work that way at all. And they go, I've never thought about my game this way, but either, yes, that's approximately true, or no, I think you've given too much value to this, not enough value to that, and then we have a conversation about where we diverge on where we think the game is and should be.
Josh, aka Ocean Gur on the Guild, was curious about whether you've worked on a game theme first. In other words, there's a theme that you want to do, or a game is tied very closely to the theme and you love it, in part because of the theme. A lot of the fun factor might come from the theme, but for some reason it just isn't going to work. Is it something where you prefer to re-theme the game or regame the theme?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting question. Personally, I don't work on a game anything first. I think that some of the designers that we work with are theme first kind of designers who have a story that they want their game to tell, and then they figure out the right mechanics to tell that story. I think that we have designers who are very mechanics first. They have put together a clever system and then affixed a theme that they think works for the game. I regard my skill set as being pretty adaptable in that I like to identify what kind of a designer I'm working with and attempt to be the yin to their yang. So if a designer brings me a game where they are very invested in the theme and they have a story that they want to tell, I try and set myself up as the person who's going to make the mechanics support that. And if they bring me a game that is very much mechanics first, I try to set myself up to be the person who helps integrate the theme in a way that the game feels thematic. I mean, at Grey Fox, we like theme, right? We don't have really any games in the line where the theme is totally irrelevant. In some way, they tie together, and we like that, right? Champions of Midgard, we think, feels like a more thematic version of some of its, closest cousins, Lords of Waterdeep or Stone Age. Even Harvest Dice, I think, being affixed with a different theme would feel totally different. The act of feeding your pig is satisfying, and planting your veggies and doing this puzzle, like, on paper it's basically a stock game, but the theme supports it. So, I guess the answer is no. I've never worked on a game theme first and not found a way to make it work. If we've signed a game where the designer came to us with a theme that they were passionate about, and they had mechanics that supported that theme already, we've kept that theme and found a way to make the mechanics work. I certainly think it's possible to design a game theme first and find that the mechanics don't support it, but I think that that's where a developer comes in. That if a designer has a theme that they're using with a game and they can't make it work, the perspective of somebody who's done this with a couple of games is going to help them either tweak the mechanics in a way that supports their narrative, or find a related but perhaps separate narrative that the mechanics they've designed support better.
What's the furthest away from an original design that you've developed a game? That's another one from Jake.
Jake's asking the tough questions.
There's some that are not so tough coming up, but that one's a tough one.
Good. Jake's going to give me a reprieve. I like Jake. Farthest away from the theme.
No, furthest away from the original design.
Oh,
from what you initially got to what it eventually was published as. What's the furthest journey in the line? Maybe it was Champions, I don't know, but it might be something else.
Maybe Captain's Wager was that game. It started as a fantasy game that shifted more than just thematically. It shifted mechanically in ways that the betting and the card play shifted somewhat. The card abilities shifted somewhat. In a game that relies pretty heavily on the card abilities, I think mechanically those changes were significant, and ending up with steampunk pirates is a far cry from an adventuring party going down into a dungeon. I don't think it happens often, because if we've gotten to a point with a game where we're interested in it as it's been presented to us, I think we already think that the mechanics and theme tend to be at least somewhat of a good fit for each other, and that the game is already fairly solid. If we get a game and we have to change it drastically from the time that we sign it to the time that we release it, we've done something wrong. Right? And it seems to me that when somebody has pitched me a game and I've gone, yes, I like it and I want to make it, that game is far enough along that I don't think drastic changes are necessary. And it might happen through the course of playtesting that we change more than we expect. Honestly, I think we always change more than we expect, right? The happiest outcome is you sign a game, you write up a report that says, I think it's great, everything's perfect. You hand it off to playtesters, everybody loves it, and then you put on party hats and crack open a bottle of champagne. And when that happens, I'll let everybody know.
Yeah.
But yeah, I honestly don't think the games have changed drastically, but if any of the designers who have worked with us listen to this, they might
beg to differ.
Right, they might feel differently. Again, Champions of Midgard is a game we worked on a lot, right? We worked on it for a year and a half, and we worked on the expansions for about that long also. And many things changed, but I don't think anything changed so significantly that anybody felt like the game was drastically different. Like, the way the troll worked is very different from where the game started. The way the merchant ships work is very different from how the game started. A lot of the ideas that got cut in the beginning got developed and added back in expansions. So from the beginning of that road to where that road is now, I think the game is much as Ola wanted it to be. And I think it is much like we envisioned it when we signed it, which isn't to say I didn't mess with that spreadsheet for hundreds of hours and try to get the balance right. It's not to say that we didn't do countless hours of research to make the theme immersive or make the runes match their abilities or I don't know, create a world that people wanted to play in. But I mean, all of those little changes to me don't feel like we strayed. It feels like we polished it to the right shine.
Yeah. When you're developing games, what I noticed and I found interesting was you do it solo. You play a lot of games solo as part of that process. You don't play it at the table with other folks taking copious notes as you do so. You're there running through that thing alone. What is it about that allows you to either focus or hone in, or what's the benefits of doing that?
I mean, very much that is about avoiding design by committee. It is really easy to get caught up in other people's enthusiasm or their negativity. And when I'm working on developing a game, I don't need either of those things. I need to be throwing things against the wall and see what sticks, which means I spend time working on components, I run through scenarios by myself, I mock up how I think other players will behave, I play the game solo and see how things work. Often, I can make a change to a game, sit down, play it for 20 minutes, and then go, that didn't work, and scrap it. So part of that is also about efficiency. I don't need to bring every change we make to a game to a larger audience, and I also don't want my half-baked ideas lauded or criticized, because if a group of people like something that I would have worked on more, I may not finish it. It may be good enough. And if a group of people hate something before I have it where it is, I might be tempted to throw this idea out as being untenable. And so those voices can be a distraction from the end goal. So I spend a lot of time developing by myself to get what I think the next version of the game is. And as soon as I feel like it's good, then I want to know what other people think of it, whether they think it's great or they think it is awful. Those are both valuable pieces of feedback, but I want them to occur at a point where I've put in enough of the work that I need to before I start doing the things that other people think a game needs.
When is a game done?
A game is never done.
Yeah.
I mean, that is something that's kind of a holdover from writing for me, that a game can always be revised and it can always be improved upon. I think we all kind of know it, even if we don't say it out loud. It's why games have expansions. The perfect is the enemy of the good. And so games are done when the majority of players are having fun, and the most critical of players can't break them. No game is for everybody, but I want to release games that when they hit the shelves, people are excited to buy them. When they hit the tables, people are excited that they play them, and that when the people who do this critically, and even people who are not in this industry, there's a lot of them who will push a game to its limits. I want them to do that and not go, I made the game fall apart. And that's when a game is done. A game is done when it's fun, and when we believe that it cannot be broken.
When it's fun and not broken.
Right. Yeah, and at that point, I mean, the process of working on a game stops for me when a game is released and I move on to the next game. But I don't know, every game release is like it's almost like having a child. Like until it's out in the world, you worry that you did something wrong.
Sure. And as much playtesting as you might put in, it's impossible to really know.
Right. And so, I don't know. I mean, when a game is close, we start setting practical deadlines, and then the games that are closest take priority in the playtest and development cycle. And I mean, often deadlines whoosh past as we realize we want to do something else with the game, and we do. And when it gets to the point where it's fun and it isn't broken and we like the way it looks and players are responding to it, the game is ready, but it isn't done. And at that point, we often will be in touch with the designer. I mean, we work pretty closely with the people that we work with and say, here's where the game is now, and play it with your groups, and this is how we intend to release it. And also, if this game has room to build more in, start thinking about what more you would do. And I mean, that's what we did with Ola when we released Champions of Midgard. He had started thinking about an expansion, and we were like, that's great. Work on it. And when you think it's ready, send it to us, and it just goes into the queue like any other game. Like, here it is. What are the parts that are fun? What are the parts that are not fun? And is it broken?
Fair enough. When that game does come out, there are going to be a lot of things on that cover. There's the publisher logo, there's the title, there might be some awards if the thing's right, and there's the designer's name. Mm-hmm. There's not Josh Lobcowicz's name on that box.
There's not.
It's in the rulebook somewhere, but it's not on that box. Is there an element of ego that you have to get past when you're in the developer's seat?
I don't know. Maybe for some people, but it's never been a problem for me. Like when I have pursued anything in my career, in my life, it's because it's something that I want to do and that I enjoy doing. Developing games is something that I have a real passion for, and it's something that I'm fortunate to feel like I have a knack for. It's satisfying for me to do what I do. And I didn't get into this industry to have my name on a box. I didn't get into this hobby because I wanted to be a game designer. I got into it because I love games, and I work with games every day. So I think it would be a pretty shallow perspective for me to have some sort of ill will about lack of recognition. I'll admit the first couple of games we put out, how excited and enthusiastic I was about having my name in the rulebook. And now it's something that I don't really think about that often. Like, we release a game, and if the game is well received, that's satisfaction for me. It means I did my job well, and people are having fun, and that's great. And then I'm on to the next thing. A couple of times at conventions, people have come to the booth and said, like, oh, you worked on this game? And I'm always very careful to be like, I didn't design it. I developed it. And people have gone, but like, you helped make this game. And I'm like, yeah, I did. And they're like, that's really cool. And those moments are satisfying, but it's not why I do this job. And it's not a job that people should pursue for some sort of fame or recognition. I think it'll be a long time before we have game developers as celebrities, and that's okay with me.
There's a reason you can do a top 6 designer list, but not a top 6 developer list. Although you were telling me you do have those celebrity moments when people realize, oh, you worked on this game, and I think you were telling me at a couple of conventions, you have signed some autographs.
It's true. I mean, people have come up to me at shows, and it's always a bit embarrassing when they're like, will you sign my game? Like, I have to tell people, like, you realize I'm not the designer. Yeah, I realize that. Okay, you realize that if I sign this, nobody's going to care. Like, I'm damaging your purchase. I mean, it helps to be self-deprecating, but yeah, I've signed a couple rule books. Generally, I have told people I don't want to sign the box of your game because people will think the designer signed it. I'll sign your rule book. And most people are fine with that. The best moments are when people have come up and said, hey, I heard you did development on this game, and I really love this game. Like, I just wanted to, like, thank you for the work you put in, and, like, a handshake or a hug at a convention from somebody who's enthusiastic that I helped put out something that brought them joy is a really joyful moment for me.
Fair enough. What's your advice to someone who's listening to this and maybe had thought of developing? Because everyone, when they're a game player, thinks, "Ooh, I have this design I could do," but they don't think, "Ooh, I could really develop this one a lot." I think most players don't think of develop versus design. Mm-hmm. If someone's listening to this and is actually intrigued and this is a path they might consider pursuing, what's the advice you would give them? Either skills they need to develop or something they should be doing if they want to take the path you're taking?
I mean, that's a tough question because the path that I'm taking is partially accidental, right? Like, I did not set out to be a game developer. I set out to be a writer. I didn't set out to be a game developer. It just kind of happened. I set out to be a writer and had a passion for this hobby and found that the skills I had as a writer and an editor translated well to this world. It doesn't mean that I think that that's like a career path that I would recommend. I don't think you could tell somebody you should go to school for English and work on writing and editing, and then before you know it, you'll be developing games. I think there are in the world of board game publishers, there are few people who do what I do full time. I think that there are publishers who don't have on-staff developers and they outsource that work and they do it freelance. I think that there are publishers that have people who wear many hats, including doing development.
I'm familiar with this concept.
Yeah, I know you are. So if somebody is really interested in the concept of developing and they think that it's something that they have the skills for and they have a knack for, they should just do it. I mean, the people who I think are most likely to be interested in this are people who are already in this hobby, right? People are not going to listen to this and go, aha, that's the $1 million idea, develop games. I mean, they're probably already working on their own designs, playtesting for other people, and those are the things that you need to do to hone those skills. You just need to kind of divorce yourself from the notion that your perspective is about creation. It is instead about refinement. And I think there are no shortage of designer groups out there who are looking for people to help them polish their games. And by playing somebody else's prototype and seeing if the feedback that you can give them is valuable to them, if it helps them improve their game, you can test whether or not this is something that you have a knack for. And if it's something that you have a knack for, those skills are of use to a ton of people. They're not necessarily publishers with, leaflets out or ads on the internet saying looking for a developer right now, but there are a million aspiring game designers in the world who need one. And if you find that it's something you can do and you can practice that with some of these aspiring game designers and you can develop that skill set, it is certainly something that you can market either to a publisher or to game designers on a freelance basis. But the trick of this hobby is you have to regard it as a hobby. You have to do it because you're passionate about it. And if you do it because you're passionate about it and then find that there's a market for your skills, then you can maybe find a way to do this at least for supplementary income, if not for a living. It's not the sort of thing I think anybody should set out to do for a living from the start. Right?
It's sort of something that has to evolve, has to be more organic than that.
Yeah, and I mean, Grey Fox is something of an interesting example. Like, we weren't a publisher that just came out of nowhere. Like I said, Shane was a part owner of Cool Stuff Inc. He had been in board game retail for quite some time. He had, worked with publishers and kind of got to know the model from the inside before he ever tried his hand at it. And and there was a learning curve, right? Even for somebody who was kind of in the industry in an adjacent fashion for a long time. And so even with that background, that knowledge, that skill set, and that capital, breaking into this industry is not something that is easy to do. And truly, I think some of this is like life philosophy for me, is just that you should do the things that you're passionate about because they bring you joy, not because they bring you money. And more often than not, if you pursue the things that you're passionate about, you will find that you can find a way to make that a bigger and bigger part of your life the more you do it.
I'll end some of this. I've taken up way too much of your time already, but I'm going to end this as I tend to more on the lighter note with several lighter questions,
okay.
Most of which are supplied by Jake Bach, but not all of them. Ribs, brisket, or pulled pork?
Oh, brisket, 100%.
Okay, that was easy. Really easy one to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy for me, especially because I don't eat pork. But for the record, I know it's a bit sacrilege since I'm in St. Louis, but Texas barbecue better than St. Louis barbecue.
You're currently in St. Louis. You're not in St. Louis. Yeah, but that could be controversial. I don't know. We'll see. BJ from War Game Gumbo, curious, what's next on your bucket list of conventions that you haven't done already, either as a gamer or someone in the industry? I think I'll modify that one because I think you've been to just about any convention you might want to go to on the game side. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, I mean, you're a little bit wrong about that.
Okay.
I mean, I'll give a twofold answer to that, just about sort of my interest as a player.
Sure.
The cons I like to attend most as a gamer are the players' cons. Things like BGG Con and Dice Tower Con, where there's this big focus on community and game playing and less on the commerce of it. But as a player and as an industry person, the Shut Up, Sit Down Con
Yeah.
is now on the list.
Heard good things.
Yeah, I've heard good things. I like the content those guys put out, and I would like to be there as a player. I don't see any reason to not go as a publisher to any convention that I have interest in as a player, right? Because I'm a hobbyist first, right? I got into this industry much later than when I started being in this hobby. And if I want to be there as a gamer, then certainly there's an audience there that would like publishers to be there. If I were there as a gamer, I would like publishers to be there showing off their stuff. So those dovetail with me. But yeah, the Shut Up, Sit Down Con, really something I'd be interested in going to. UK Games Expo, I've heard great things about. That one is probably more as a publisher I'd like to be there, but certainly the opportunity to go as a player and play with people that I don't regularly see at stateside cons would be a lot of fun for me.
What's your favorite Feld?
It's probably Trajan.
Trajan's real good.
Yeah, it is really good, but I don't know. I have a soft spot in my heart for Notre Dame, which I think is a brilliantly designed game, and it was also the first Feld that I played. And Castles of Burgundy is also pretty high on my list, but yeah, it's probably Trajan.
What is your least favorite published board game you have ever played?
My least favorite published board game.
And you rank everything on BGG, so there's something there's something you've given a 1 to.
There is?
I don't know. I haven't checked.
I don't think so.
Oh, okay. Maybe 2?
I read the BGG descriptions really literally.
Oh, okay.
And one says that it defies description of a game and it's clearly broken. And I don't think anything I've played has defied the description of a game. I think that Dante's Inferno might be my lowest rated game. I think I gave it a 3. I certainly have comments on BGG about it, something to the effect of it's like Settlers of Catan if you could spend your sheep to move your opponent's settlements to worse hexes, and that the game does accurately recreate the feeling of being in hell. I also think I mentioned that my one play of it took almost an eternity, so that might be the worst published board game I've played.
Well, and as someone who's written a lot of ratings, when you first started getting stuff out there on the published side of things, was it a little weird having the tables turned on you?
Yeah, I mean, maybe. Perhaps weirder for me was getting the publisher badge on the BGG account.
I just got mine. Shiny new.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it suddenly came with this moment of panic that everything I'd ever said would now be read in light of my profession. But, prior to a certain point, I had no idea what the future would hold. I was just some guy hating playing Dante's Inferno. But yeah, I mean, it's a little strange to have it turned around. And I don't know. It's something that we have to laugh at. Like you have to accept that no game is for everybody, and if some number of people really enjoy something you've made, you should be happy about that. If any of your listeners have ever watched The Guild, that's kind of like a cautionary tale for me. Like, I don't want to be that guy in The Guild who's constantly reading everything negative that people say about his company online, because it can cripple you. You can't please everybody, and you can't let feedback paralyze you. So I don't know. I remember once upon a time in early days of Champions of Midgard, somebody rated the game pretty low and they wrote Champions of Meh. And I remember just like,
it's not bad.
But it felt bad. Like,
yeah, sure.
I worked on it for a long time and I put a lot into it. It really took the wind out of my sails.
Did anyone do Chumpions?
I don't think so.
No? Okay.
Yeah, it really deflated me for a while, and now I look at it like, I think the comment is really funny. And it's also a word that I use often. If somebody played a game and their experience was meh, Champions of Meh might be, if that's as bad as it gets, then I'm happy to have it.
What's the most starstruck you've ever been meeting a board game celebrity? I don't think you get starstruck much anymore, but I know you probably did at one point.
I did. I think the most starstruck I have ever been was meeting Richard Borg at a tiny, like little wargamers convention in Florida. I was there running the Cool Stuff booth, just selling games, and he had the booth next to me. And I was like, oh, you designed one of my favorite games. And he was like, oh, Memoir? And I was like, no, Herrenzeus. And he was like, oh. And he was really surprised. But, like, we got to chat kind of for the weekend. And it was, like, I remember being nervous to approach him and tell him that I liked his games. So I think that was the most starstruck. I also had a moment like that with Mike Fitzgerald, honestly not too long ago, like well beyond the point that I shouldn't have been starstruck anymore. But he was one of those people who was making games before I was really into this hobby. It was well before 2003. I just found Mystery Rummy in a bookstore and bought cases 1 and 3, or 1 and 2.
You still had a Mystery Rummy out on the table, even tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I have all of them in my collection because I love the designs, but I mean, I bought them before hobby games were a thing and just kind of played them with friends. It was like, it's like Rummy, but better. And it was, I mean, that might have been a moment that my eyes were kind of open to the fact that there's more out there in the world of gaming. And so when I met him just last year, like, I had to we were chatting professionally, and I had to sort of stop and like squee for a minute and be like, I want to tell you, like, I'm a big fan and here's why. And so like I had that fanboy moment, and it was fun, and he was gracious, and he's a great designer, and I'm glad he's still putting out stuff for me to put in my collection.
He's a good dude. I just slammed one of his designs pretty hard on a recent episode, so sorry, Mike. Love Baseball Highlight 2045, first mention of the episode. Anyway, yeah, he's a great guy. Yeah. No doubt about it. All right, I'll do a quick plug before I do my final question. Quick plug because I have to do my job. Bushido's awesome. Why should people be backing Bushido here in a couple weeks?
I mean, for the same reason that I think that they should back anything that we've put out, because it's fun. But Bushido, I'll give you a little anecdote for it because it really captured me. That is a game that I was sold on in the 5-minute pitch, where I was told it's got a little bit of drafting, it's got some dice-based combat, it's got this martial arts feel, every game is different, and it plays in about 30 minutes. And I went, that sounds really neat. And when I played it, it felt different than I expected it to be because of 2 factors. 1, attacking and defending simultaneously is exciting and stressful. And 2, the escalation of damage makes it feel like a sword fight. When you get a big hit on somebody, it can mean death. And it's this really neat back and forth until you get that critical blow. And it's satisfying. Also, the art is killer. So people should check it out when the Kickstarter goes live. I hope they will think the art is killer, but I can tell them for certain that I love the game. I'm really excited about it.
And that attacking and defending at the same time will be familiar to any fans of Baseball Highlights 2045 because that's kind of what you're doing in that game as well. And for folks who know my tastes, I love the game, and I don't want to hype it too much. I do love it. For folks just to fill in a little gap, it's a 2-player dueling game, drafting, dice-driven combat. Check it out, in any case. All right, done with the plugs. Final question. I asked the same final question to everyone who's been on here. Josh, did you do your homework and find out what this question was ahead of time? It wasn't on the Guild.
No, I didn't do my homework.
That's all right. No one ever does. The question
Is everybody always honest, or do sometimes people fake it? Yeah, I know what's coming.
there are some people. Anytime someone said that, I think they genuinely did. So,
Okay.
But I appreciate your honesty, sir. Are you prepared for the final question?
I hope so.
If you, Josh Lobcowicz, attorney at law, not really, could be any flavor of ice cream, which flavor would you be and why?
That's a terrible question. Because there's infinite flavors. Yeah, I would like to be green tea ice cream.
Why?
Because it's simple and refreshing, and it's both worldly and unpretentious. And those are things that I aspire to be.
Nailed it. All right. Folks, if you want to reach Josh, hey Josh, how should they reach you? If you're an aspiring designer or someone who just wants to reach out and talk Stefan Feld or Mystery Rummy or whatever the case might be, what's the best way for folks to do that?
Twitter is absolutely my go-to. At J Lobcowicz, the letter J, Lobkowicz. When I'm actively working on development and able to access Twitter, I like to post about it there, so sometimes people will get some development insights, but it's also a place that I use personally and professionally, so people will get to know me a little bit there too. It's not simply like a developer's output. So people can follow me there. They can shoot me messages. I respond to ats and DMs when I've got the time to do so. So that is probably the best first line.
And feel free to send unsolicited prototypes straight to Grey Fox Games. No problem at all. We'll flip a coin. If it comes up heads, we'll sign it.
Honestly, if people have prototypes that they think would fit our line and they want to hit me on Twitter, I would love to take a look at their sell sheets.
There we go. Very good. The invitation's open. Josh, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.